The town of Red Hollow was the kind of place where people remembered your mistakes longer than your name. For Clara Bennett, that meant every day felt the same. At 26 years old, she worked at Mrs. Turner's boarding house, scrubbing floors, washing laundry, and staying quiet whenever the guests laughed at her appearance. Clara was larger than most women in town. People noticed it before they noticed anything else, not her kindness, not her patience, not the fact that she worked harder than anyone in the building, just her size. One rainy afternoon, several young women gathered in the dining room, whispering over a newspaper advertisement. Ranch helper needed. Temporary position. Good wages. The advertisement belonged to Caleb Walker. Everyone knew the name. Caleb owned the largest ranch outside Red Hollow. He lived alone, rarely came to town, and had a reputation for being impossible to work for. They say he fired 3 workers last month. They say he doesn't smile. They say he scares grown men. The women laughed nervously. Then one of them spotted Clara, carrying a basket of towels. A cruel grin appeared on her face. "I've got an idea." The others immediately understood. Within minutes, they convinced Mrs. Turner to send Clara to the ranch, not because they believed she could help, because they expected her to fail. The next morning, Clara began the long walk to Walker Ranch. Dark clouds covered the sky. Cold wind swept across the hills. By the time she reached the property, her boots were coated in mud. The ranch looked enormous. Fences stretched for miles. Horses grazed peacefully in distant fields. But one thing immediately caught her attention: silence. The place felt lonely, as though no laughter had visited it in years. Or then she heard shouting. A loud crash echoed from inside a workshop. Clara froze. Moments later, a tall man stepped through the doorway. Broad shoulders, weathered face, hard eyes. "Caleb Walker, what do you want?" he asked. Clara swallowed. "I was sent to help." Caleb looked at her for several seconds. Then he sighed. "They sent you, didn't they?" She lowered her gaze. That answer was enough. He understood exactly why she was there, not as help, as a joke. "You should go home." Clara's heart sank. "I need the job." See, something changed in Caleb's expression. Only slightly, perhaps. He recognized desperation because he carried plenty of his own. Finally, he nodded toward the barn. "If you're staying, start there. No smile, no welcome, just work." And Clara gladly accepted. The barn had clearly been neglected. Dust covered every beam, broken. Equipment filled the corners. Old hay was scattered everywhere. For hours she worked without stopping, sweeping, sorting, cleaning, organizing. By noon her back hurt. By evening her hands burned. Still she continued. When Caleb inspected the barn before sunset, he stopped in the doorway. The place looked completely different. For several moments he said nothing. Then he simply nodded. "Good work," 2 words, that was all. Yet Clara felt more pride than she had in years, because nobody had said those words to her before, not sincerely. The next few days followed the same. Pattern work, silence, more work, but slowly, things began to change. Caleb noticed she never complained. Ark noticed he wasn't cruel, just lonely. One afternoon, she found him repairing a fence, alone. A deep cut ran across his hand. Blood dripped onto the dirt. "You should clean that," she said quietly. Caleb glanced down. "It's nothing," but Clara returned minutes later, carrying clean water and bandages. Reluctantly, he allowed her to help. Neither spoke much, yet for the first time, the silence felt comfortable, not empty. As the weeks passed, the ranch improved. Fields looked healthier. Buildings looked cleaner. Even the horses seemed calmer. For the first time in years, the property felt alive. Unfortunately, the town noticed, and towns love gossip. Rumors spread quickly. People claimed Caleb had hired Clara out of pity. Others said worse. One Saturday afternoon, several men rode to the ranch intending to mock them. They laughed, made jokes, insulted Clara openly. She stood quietly, staring at the ground. Then Caleb stepped forward. His voice remained calm but dangerous. "Leave." The men laughed again. Caleb didn't. A long silence followed. Eventually, They turned their horses around and rode away, not because they respected Clara, because they knew Caleb meant every word. After they disappeared, Clara looked at him. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." "Why?" Caleb stared toward the horizon. "Because nobody deserves to be treated like that." The answer stayed with her long after sunset. For years, she had accepted cruelty as normal. Caleb was teaching her something different, respect. Meanwhile, Clara was changing Caleb too. The ranch owner who never smiled now occasionally laughed. The man who avoided conversation now asked questions. The lonely house slowly became a home. One evening, while sharing supper, Caleb finally spoke about his past. His father had been harsh, demanding. Nothing was ever good enough. The pressure had followed him into adulthood. Clara listened without judgment. For the first time, Caleb told someone the truth, not the version he showed the town, the real truth. And somehow, that made the burden lighter. Months passed, summer arrived. Walker Ranch experienced its most successful season in years. The ranch prospered, the animals were healthy, the crops were strong, yet the greatest change wasn't visible in the fields. It was visible in Caleb himself. One evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Orange light stretched across the valley. Neither spoke for a long time. Then Caleb finally broke the silence. "When you arrived, I thought you'd leave in a day." Clara laughed softly. "So did. I'm glad you didn't." Her heart skipped. Caleb looked directly at her, not at her appearance, not at her flaws, at her, the person she truly was. "I don't know when it happened," he admitted, "but this place feels different when you're here." Tears filled Clara's eyes. Nobody had ever chosen her before. Nobody had ever looked at her that way. Caleb stood, walked closer, and offered his hand. "You helped save this." And Clara took his hand. "You saved me too." Months later, the entire town gathered for a wedding. Many attended out of curiosity, some attended out of guilt, others attended because they finally understood the truth. The woman they once mocked possessed more strength and kindness than any of them. And the ranch owner they feared had become a better man because of hers. Clara walked down the aisle. She noticed several former critics lowering their eyes in shame, but she felt no anger, only peace, because she no longer needed their approval. She had discovered her worth, and Caleb had discovered that kindness can heal wounds that strength never could. Together they built a life filled with laughter, respect, and second chances. The town eventually stopped talking, as towns always do. But years later, people still remembered one lesson: never underestimate someone simply because others do. Sometimes the person everyone laughs at becomes the person everyone admires, and sometimes the greatest love stories begin with a cruel joke that completely backfires.